So the next speaker is Mark van der Loo. He's the editor-in-chief of the Art Journal, works for Statistics Netherlands and for the University of Leiden. And he will give an overview about the last 15 years of the Art Journal. Mark, welcome him, please.
Yes, thanks for the introduction, and thank you everybody for joining my talk. I'm a little bit nervous because this is like the first time I'm talking about work that's not mainly mine, right? I'm used to talking about stuff that I do myself. So that's one reason, and another reason is that the people whose work I'm going to talk about, many of them are in this room, but you know, maybe they get nervous now. We'll see. So I've been frequently attending USR since about 2010, and I think the Art Journal was not represented there very often in talks. So when I assumed this role, I thought it would be nice to sort of look back, what are we doing, how do we work, give some tips to authors, and maybe also look forward to where we think Art Journal might be going. So let's start with a bit of history. So before the Art Journal, there was the Art News that was started by Frits Leijs and Kurt Hornig, what Kurt already told you, I think, on Tuesday morning. And I thought it would be nice to look at the first issue, if I can find the browser. Is it this one? Yeah, so this is the issue. So Art News was already a peer-reviewed journal. So that's something that actually I didn't know before, but I found out quite recently when I was starting to look a little bit into the history. So the first editors were Kurt and Frits. Is Kurt in the room? No? Is anybody else does anybody remember from our foundation or our core who was the first author of the first paper in Art News? And I'll give you a hint. The author is in the room. So Luke, yes, correct. Luke Tierney, yeah. On memory management. And I remember this became a big project, I think, in our core. So it also gives you kind of a history of R itself. Then Thorsten is in there, who gave a very nice keynote yesterday. Peter Dalgaard, who is also present. And then there are two papers with Brian Ripley as only author. There's John Chambers and Duncan Temple Lang, who's also first author on another paper, and then Bill Venables, who's also like a famous in the art community. So it's just nice to look back and to see that the people who contributed to like the first issue are still around and still like active member of the community, at least many of them. And then in 2009, it became the Art Journal. So I thought I'll give a quick look also at the first volume there. So the editors were Vince, what was his name? Carey, Heather Turner, who is here, and Peter Dalgaard, who is also here. And then the first paper in that issue is by John Chambers, who wrote about facets of R. And I went through that paper, and he goes through some like technical facets. But one thing that I liked really much, that already then, I mean, we are discussing a lot about like how important the community is. But facet number 6 that John mentioned already 15 years ago is the collaborative, worldwide, open source effort. So the idea of the importance of the community has been in there for a long time. Is this my slides? Yeah. So the first issue appeared in 2009. A nice milestone to mention is that 4 years later, the 100th paper was published. In 2021, the volume of submissions became large enough that they started recruiting associate editors, so people who help finding reviewers, getting papers reviewed, or might review them themselves. And since 2022, papers are available in HTML and PDF, and we also had an incredibly impressive keynote this morning by Abhishek. And I talked to him also afterwards, and I said, this is like something that I wouldn't even start on, like converting LaTeX and all these papers with different LaTeX issues to HTML. But so I was deeply impressed by his work, and of his collaborators, of course. I want to emphasize that the Art Journal, it's a free access paper. It's an indexed paper, so it's proper scientific journal. There are no publication costs, so we don't ask any contribution from authors in that respect. And it's run completely by volunteers, just like CRAN is, and most of our core and our foundation. Which also has effects, which I will talk about later. So I was looking at like, what's the impact factor, right? And I'm not a specialist in these things, but basically what I found out is that, you know, there's lies, damn lies, statistics, and then there's impact factors, because there's a whole world of how to measure these things and assumptions, and you don't know, what's taken into account and what not. In Wikipedia, it's like 2.1, but what that means, you know, it doesn't, I'm not even sure. But it's well cited. I mean, we have papers with hundreds of citations. This is something that I can attest to. So it is a properly read journal that has some significance in the field. So yeah, so Abhijek showed you this data already. We have published, our journal has published more than 700 papers over 34 issues. We have transferred, when I say we, I mean the journal, not me personally. So the number of papers per issue was gradually increasing, and you know, building an issue with more papers is harder, because in the end there's also like one PDF produced with everything in it. So all the sort of issues with building papers, because you build them from source, pile up, right? So it was decided to move from 2 issues per year to 4 issues per year since 2022. So the X scale is not completely linear, but there's a color difference. So we have been growing. So I will talk a little bit about how does the journal, how are we set up, and how do we work, and then I'll come to like some tips like for you as a if you want to be an author. So our journal is sort of like owned by the R Foundation. They are like the owner of the whole enterprise, I would say. We have executive editors, so there are 4 of them. I will show you in the next slide. And then there's support from an advisory board. So the 4 people is Henrik Bengtsson, who's also here. I'm not sure if he's in the room. He's sitting there. Hi, Henrik. Gabriela de Quiros, she is, of course, the founder of Our Ladies Global. Rebecca Killick from Lancaster University, and Michael Kane is in there. So they look at kind of the long-term evolution of the journal, so we go to them for advice, like if you want to update some documentation, or like adopt a new policy, like what should we look at when somebody submits a paper on a package or something, so they can give us some kind of feedback from a bit more distance than us, who are sitting like in the middle of all the activity. And then since 2021, we have great help from a big team of associate editors. This is too small for you to read, but the slides are online. I'll give you a QR code later. So how does it work? We have 4 executive editors that is like sort of a rotating panel. So once you become an editor, so Emmy was the last one who became editor last year. Before that, Rob Hindman, I rolled in some time ago, and then you sort of shift. At some point you become editor-in-chief, then you're 1 year still as editor to sort of finish the work that you were doing, the papers you were handling, and then you rotate out. So last year Simon Urbanek was the editor-in-chief, and before him Catherine Hurley, who's now out of the team. And from January we have Emily Zabor rolling into the team. So we have some like continuity, and we can sort of share knowledge, and it takes a while, you know, otherwise if you just have people coming in and out too quickly, you sort of lose the knowledge that is built up. And then there are 27, I think there's 27 now, associate editors from, I must say, almost all over the world. I have a map, and I will thank Barry Rawlinson for helping me with geocoding, because that was something I never did before. I could have asked Etzer maybe as well. And we'd had some back and forth, and in the end I managed to produce a map. So that's also like an attest to how nice this community is. So this is really not very colorful. It looks much better on my screen. But you can see we are spread over, like at the moment, so many time zones. I mean, I organize like an associate editors meeting online every month, and it has become impossible to have everybody in one meeting, because usually if you have like Europe and United States and maybe somebody in Australia, it works if I have a meeting at 11 p.m. and then somebody has one, you know, in the morning and somebody one in the afternoon, but now it's impossible to do it unless somebody wakes up like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning. So what we do now is I split the meetings. Just have to do it twice. Which is sort of, I mean, it's just really awesome just to realize with how many people from how many different places we are working here. So, and these are affiliations, so this is maybe not even where people are actually from, but this is where they currently work. Okay, so how does it work, a journal? I mean, maybe you have been on the other side, like me, like submitting papers, and at some point you get some kind of verdict back, like rejected, accepted, or minor revisions, major revisions. And so maybe it's nice to know also a little bit, like, so how does that go? You know, what happens to my paper before I get nervous and get this, the verdict? So we have some kind of like distribution of responsibility. So first of all, the editor-in-chief, like me, is also an executive editor. So I do everything if the editors also do, which means handling papers. Responsible for technically building the journal issues and doing some organizational stuff. So organizing the meetings with the associate editors and with the editors, answering a lot of emails by authors who inquire about the status of their manuscript, for example. All these things. There's a lot of communication going on back and forth. Executive editors are doing sort of the actual work. So they are starting to do the work. So the first thing to decide is, okay, we receive a manuscript. Is this something we want to have reviewed, right? That's the first decision to make. So that's like the first quality check. And there are things that we check is, for example, does the code run, right? This is the R journal. You will probably have some code that you demonstrate there. So we want a .r file. That R file should run without problems, right? We will install the packages, but then if it doesn't run, it goes straight back. We don't send it to a reviewer if these technical things don't work. Then just generally, is it in the scope of the R journal? I mean, I have seen papers appearing in the inbox that have absolutely nothing to do with R. So I'm sorry that it's better to look for another outlet. It was in principle interesting topic, but it's just has nothing to do with R. So that's rejected as well. And then there's like general, you just look at like the structure of the paper. Is it enough novelty? Some things to avoid, for example, I will come back to that a bit later. What we see is that sometimes people almost like, they write like a methodological paper in another journal, almost copy that, and then have like a little bit of R in the back, because then they made a package or a function somewhere in GitHub and then submit that, but that's not enough R content, right? This is, you write about R, and the quality of the software is a thing in itself. The software is just a whole product in itself. So you really have to think about like, what are you contributing to the R community in that sense. And then the executive editor is responsible for taking the editorial decision. And then you as an author, you will know who your editor is. So if you submit a manuscript, you will get an email saying, thank you for your submission. This is your handling editor. And that's also the person that is ultimately responsible for saying this is rejected, accepted with revisions, or accepted. Major or minor revisions is then the labeling. Then we have associate editors. They remain anonymous towards the authors. So the associate editors handle papers usually in their own field. So if somebody is a specialist, for example, in handling geo data or in a time series, if you receive a manuscript in time series, it will go to somebody with that specialty. Associate editors have like a network in that field. They probably know also the important packages in that field, so they can sort of gauge the novelty of a manuscript, and also know like what if there are competing packages, for example, or competing papers. And they also have the network for who can review it. And then they have it reviewed, send it out to reviewers, just like executive editors might also do, because executive editors also do the work of associate editors. So if you go up, you just do more work, right? That's the thing. And then they give an advice of the decision, which is usually copied. I mean, they have looked at it very well, unless there are some reasons, and then they might go, okay, this is not a minor, but a major revision or something like that. So that's more or less the process and who does what. So how do? We reject about 60% of submissions. I dug a little bit in the database, so I think this is comparable to what other journals do. So that may be it's out of scope, it's not new enough, or just the quality is really low. There are several reasons. It can be rejected when on entrance. It can also be rejected after review, for example. How long does it take? I mean, I get a lot of questions for status updates. So the median is about, so this is per issue, the time to acceptance, from submission to acceptance. The median time is like 200 and something days, fluctuates a little bit. So you might think, okay, that takes a long time, but there are several reasons that there can be delays. Sometimes we say, okay, the code is not running, or we see some issues with the package that you are writing about. Can you fix that and resubmit? So then we depend on the author, like how long does it take before we get something back, right? We start counting once it's submitted. Sometimes it takes a while to find a good reviewer. I have had cases where I asked about 10 people and everybody said no, or this is not my field, or I'm out of this field. So that's also something that can take time. Reviewers are volunteers as well, so they might do it sometimes in 2 days. It can also take 2-3 months. I mean, they also have holidays and urgent deadlines and so on. Then it comes back, say with a minor or major revision. We send it back to the author, and sometimes the authors take time, right? So then authors might also wait 3 months for sending something back. So there are several stages where this delay can occur. Then I cut off the axis here at 0, but there was one paper that was actually accepted before submission, so 148 days before submission. So that just shows that, you know, our administration, it's pretty good, but some, I think there was a mix-up with the year there. So that didn't actually happen, but I thought it was fun to show this. So I have about 4 minutes left, so let me say something about, so if you want to publish in the R journal, so there's 2 steps. First you want to make sure that you get reviewed, and then you want to make sure that the review is positive. So getting reviewed is like, for a large extent, also technical exercise. So I advise you to use the RJ tools package to prepare your paper. It's on CRAN. Because it will like set up a lot of things for you. Like it takes, you get a manuscript prepared in Markdown, which is what we are preferring at the moment because of the output in PDF and HTML. Make sure the code runs. I mean, just make a copy somewhere in an empty place without packages installed and see if you can run it in a clean place. Because we are getting your manuscript, let's say, in a clean place. And there might be assumptions in your code that you don't think about because your local system has all kind of systems installed that you're using. And my last JSS submission, I failed to do that. So I'm sorry to the JSS editors here. I mean, I also make this mistake. I know it's a lot of work, but it really helps us to do things faster. Yeah, so all code must be open source. We've had cases where and published preferably also on CRAN, right? It must be not only open source, but it must also be sort of easily available for a longer time, and CRAN guarantees that. So we've had cases where we had to ask authors to update the paper because they used, like the package they talked about was completely open source, but part of the paper used code that was only available on GitHub, and that's just not sustainable enough because you never know what the author of that repository does with it. And then, of course, yeah, paper must be original enough. We've had occasions of plagiarism. We've seen that. And it must be related to R, what I told you. So passing the review, just some tips. Write for a broad audience. We have seen, I mean, there are so many niches in science that use R. And it's very, and if you're used to writing in that niche for a certain journal, for a certain like subtopic, you're very accustomed to using all kind of jargon. But the R journal is aimed at a broad audience. So try to avoid like the jargon and explain maybe like the broad problem that you're trying to solve. Focus on the contribution of R. We are not, I mean, you can publish like methodological advances, but we are not a methodology journal. So the contribution to R is important. Yeah, I'm just going to skip quickly to this one. What we like to see more in the R journal type of papers, what is something more studies on R and the software community, so something I might call like cron studies. Cron is such an enormously rich source of data. I mean, you could see who is collaborating, you can see the quality of packages, you can see tests, checks, how they evolve. That's something that is really worth digging into. And I know we have some papers in the pipeline, we can do more. Topical reviews, like if you look at the task views, they're awesome. But I would like to see like review papers that say, in this type of field, we have all these packages and there's a gap and there's room for research, for example. Point out where the community can do more and compare like what's the best way forward, which packages are leading, which might not be leading, and so on. And then R coding itself, right? I've myself written one paper some years ago about like a trick that you can use in R. So if you learn something like new in R coding, I mean R is a functional language, so you can do like really abstract stuff there. That's also interesting, right? Because these are not like very simple things to come up with. We have a database of reviewers. If you want to become a reviewer, I invite you to scan this QR code. You can fill in a form, tell us where you work and what's your specialty, and you might be invited to review. It would be highly appreciated. And finally, I have one request. I will stop talking. If you choose to applaud, please do not applaud for me, but applaud for all these wonderful people who have contributed to our news and our journal in the past 24 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for these insights over the last 15 years. It's impressive that so many of the original authors are sitting in this room that use R. So, time for questions. Yes, here's one.
So I have a question regarding your submission process. So compared to other journals, or at least most people, what they are used to, your submission process is a bit strange, I would say. I don't know how to exactly say. But do you plan to create a submission portal? And also, like, how do you communicate with the reviewers? Is it all done by email?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, actually. That's Simon is working on that, actually. I think he has an R Consortium grant for this also. So he's working on having a submission portal where you can put in your manuscript and where you could also read like the status updates, right? Like if it's sent to a reviewer, if it came back, and then you can get, so that, but by now it's still some manual work. Yeah, so what we would love to do is standardize the manuscripts in such a way that they are submitted and then automatically, for example, the R code is tested, right? But that will require also some like security measures, because just running any code that you get in an inbox is maybe not the best idea. But this is certainly something that we're working on, yeah. Thanks.
Thanks. One short question. No? If not, then thanks again, Mark.